Welcome back into the Red Zone Podcast. My name is Colten Bartholomew, UW football beat reporter here for the Wisconsin State Journal, joined by longtime beat reporter and now columnist Jim Polzin. Jim, we're in a situation that I think we both predicted for this week, going into the Minnesota game, going into the Axe week. Not the same look of that situation where the Badgers can win the Big Ten West with a win. I thought the season would go a little bit differently, obviously, but the Badgers are in a situation where, a lot of goals are still ahead of them. They can still win the Big Ten. They've got to win this game to get to Indianapolis and challenge for the Big Ten title. But, despite a bad start, the Badgers are kind of where I think a lot of people assumed they were going to be at the end of the regular season.
Yeah, I was thinking on one of the flights I took this weekend was I predicted 10-2, and that seemed like an awful prediction weeks and weeks ago. But it's only going to end up being one game off if the Wisconsin wins this last game. So it's not.
Yeah, it's really a playoff. If they would have not had one of those red zone turnovers against Penn State, that's a game they should have won. And, I said for the first 2 months of the season that the further we got away from it, I thought that was going to look better and better for Wisconsin to be that close in that game. But that kind of flipped. Penn State has had a really rough, second half of the year, so it hasn't looked as good. But I was more on the train of I thought they could go undefeated in this regular season. And I think if you take the way that this team's playing in the last 7 games and stretch that out, that's tough to do. And you can say that about a lot of teams, take their best stretch of games and play that way the whole year. But I don't, I know the scores were lopsided in Michigan and Notre Dame. Those games weren't that bad, I didn't think. I mean, they got bad, obviously, late in the game in the fourth quarters, but the Badgers hung in those games more than the final score indicated. And I think this team, I think people that are ranking this team and looking at it are seeing that because they're number 15 in the CFP poll right now, number 18 in the AP, and they're behind Iowa, which blows my mind. But I'm an AP voter, and I have takes that a lot of people don't agree with either, so I can't really hate on too many guys. But I just think that there's a lot of good things that are happening with this team, and despite all the negativity that there was in that first month of the year, they're where they wanted to be, and they can make something happen here.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to see Wisconsin-Michigan play again. Like you said, I think that's a good point, that this is just a completely different Wisconsin team now than it was on October 2nd. The other thing is, they were asked yesterday, Matt Henningsen was asked this yesterday, do you look at it like, hey, we overcame everything and here we are with a chance at a West Division title, or do you say, if we had only done this a little bit earlier, we're playing for something bigger right now? And he kind of in typical 4.0 Matt Henningsen form, kind of Heisman'd the question and got around it. So, but it's interesting heading into this final week, just like where they could be. But I do think probably should focus on the positive that here they are. I mean, they have overcome a lot this year, and to still put them in position to win a Big Ten title.
Yeah, I agree. So we'll get into a bunch of that, the discussion of all the stakes are in this Minnesota game a little bit later. But to give you guys a quick rundown of the show, we're going to talk about if there are any concerns coming off the Wisconsin win over Nebraska about the Wisconsin defense, which is almost like heresy to say because of how good this defense has been throughout the year. But you see what Nebraska did in that 35-28 UW win last week, and raises a couple of red flags. So we're going to talk about those. We'll talk about the Minnesota matchup and some of the keys for that game, and then make our Big Ten picks. Both of us had a winning week last week, so good stuff there. We will get into all of that right after this. All right, Jim, like I said a little bit ago, a performance like the Wisconsin defense had against Nebraska, you look at it, Nebraska didn't punt very often. It was either a touchdown or interception. Basically, it was the results of most of their drives. Nebraska had the second most points allowed with the UW defense on the field to only Michigan this year, and the most yards allowed by the UW defense. So we were, talking throughout the game and have talked since, but what were some of the issues that jumped out to you the most, or you think are, something that really needs to be addressed so it doesn't carry over into these, last regular season game and into the postseason?
Well, we talked about this during the game, but crossing routes just killed them. I mean, they were constantly wide open. I think the thing that Jim Leonhard said that stood out to me was that, there's a lot of eye candy. maybe slight wrinkles that they hadn't seen from Nebraska and Nebraska threw some stuff out there with an extra, the bye week to work with. I think Adrian Martinez played really well. Looking back now, considering that he's not playing this week because of a shoulder injury, that's even more remarkable of a performance. So I think they just, and they have the personnel too. Like we probably should have known that Nebraska's got a really good offense. I mean, they've got a lot of good parts. They have a good quarterback, a stud wide receiver, a really good tight end, good running back, which we didn't get to see much of their running game, but I thought they ran the ball almost as well as anybody on Wisconsin, especially early. Mm-hmm. And they just, they had a lot of parts. I think the thing that was most stunning to me was I really thought at halftime the script would kind of flip. I thought Jim Leonard would make some adjustments and the defense would kind of go back to its own way in the second half. That didn't happen.
Yeah, it started off looking like that because Wisconsin gets that interception on the first drive of the third quarter. The offense goes in and punches in a touchdown. And I was with you. I was in that same mindset. It's like, all right, kind of a wake-up call in that first half, and then they'll roll. And then they didn't. Nebraska went right back down and scored. That was the thing that's a little bit concerning to me because it's been a thing all year for this defense that you give them a lead, they protect it, and even if the team, the opposition can get back into it a little bit later, which hasn't happened often or super often, but if they can get back into it later, that's a separate issue. But they had leads of 7-0, 14-7, 21-14, and then 28-21. All of them let up, which it's one touchdown. It's 7 points, but it's one touchdown each of those times. But it's just that those are the situations that this Badger defense all year has stepped up when the offense has responded and given them a lead. You wrote about it in your column on Sunday, Jim, or for Sunday, that this is the first time that the offense really had to carry the defense. You mentioned the crossing routes, and some of those things have been not a consistent theme because there's a lot of elements that go into letting those routes develop. Like I thought Nebraska's offensive line played their best game of the entire season. Scott Frost and their offense did a really good job of keeping tight ends, running backs, play action stuff, keeping so many people back there to protect Martinez. He's a mobile guy anyway, so he was able to buy some time with movement, let those routes get downfield. And, some of them, guys like Caesar Williams and Faion Hicks, are in decent trail position, but then on a couple of them, especially on that first drive, Faion Hicks got a couple of times confused. They're trying to pass things off in that on those crossing routes because at a certain point, Faion Hicks could start from his corner position, follow his guy to about the middle of the field, and then a safety who was already there could keep up with him the rest of the way. And that confusion on the motions and when guys should be passed off, that was pretty apparent. And I would say that to me would be the biggest concern is we talked after the Penn State game, after the Michigan game, the miscommunications on defense when a team has good receivers, which Nebraska does too. I don't think Minnesota has that same level, but that communication on the defense with a really veteran group is something that, especially in Week 11, you wouldn't think you would be seeing, but it's kind of showed, like, even as good as this team's played, you can confuse them a little bit.
Yeah, and, I had a lot of questions after the game, like, is this a blueprint game? I don't know that it is necessarily. Like, I don't know that Minnesota's got the same tools to match what Nebraska did. Now, Ohio State does, but Ohio State's going to test you regardless, right?
Right.
I mean, they're just going to throw their studs out on the field, and they've got three legitimately number one receivers. They've got a good running game. They've got a good quarterback. So I don't know that they have to throw a lot of eye candy at Wisconsin to be successful against them. So I don't know. I'm not overly concerned about this film becoming a way to beat this Wisconsin defense, but it's concerning. Like, I feel silly because before the game we did that video, and my underrated group was the secondary, and the secondary played probably its worst game of the season. I thought one thing you hit on though I thought was important was they just could not get to Martinez, and that's a lot of that's a credit to him. I just think he's got a really good way of escaping pressure and then doing something with it afterwards. I mean, I just think he made a lot of plays. He kept alive a lot of possessions with his feet and then did something with it.
Yeah, and I think that's why I'm with you. I don't think this is a blueprint game for how you beat the Wisconsin defense because you're making a lot of assumptions that would have to happen again. Like Nick Herbig has to miss 2 sacks that he should have had. Leo Chanel has to miss multiple sacks by about half a second. There's so many factors that Martinez did a great job. And you mentioned he's hurt this week now because of a couple of shots. I think Parker Gabriel, our colleague out in Lincoln, he put a video up on Twitter saying there was a shot that Leo Chanel put on Martinez on a big completion, actually, and Martinez landed really hard on his shoulder, and they think that's when it separated, and he was able to play through it, which, that guy's been so gutsy all year, and then, obviously now he's in a situation that physically can't play. I just think that if you're an opponent saying, all right, let's run what Nebraska did, you've got to commit to 7 and 8 man protections, which that's tough to do when you're, depending on the talent you have on the outside. And then you have to say our quarterback has to make moves, has to escape the pocket, it has to be super accurate on the move. Those are all a lot of tough things, and I know Adrian Martinez makes some mistakes that Nebraska fans have been pulling their hair out for since he really got there, and we saw a couple of them on Saturday. That the second interception that Colin Wilder had was just basically a pop-up with playing kind of like playing 500 in the backyard where he just threw it up there and was about to get hit. But I think overall, if you're an opponent trying to say, let's do what Nebraska did, you're putting your quarterback at risk, and you're putting your entire offense kind of in a box of, all right, well, if we don't win these routes, this is going to be a horrendously bad play. Like if our guy isn't able to get free, or Wisconsin communicates well enough and passes guys off, our quarterback's sitting back there with nobody open and no options really. Yeah,
I think big picture-wise, I think this is not a bad thing for this Wisconsin defense to get humbled a little bit. It's a little bit of a wake-up call. Maybe they needed that to some degree. Jim Leonard made a good point yesterday or Monday too, on how teams need to win this way at times. It had been pretty easy. There's no way you can go win 7 consecutive games and not win an ugly game. Like I wish I would have had that quote for my column on Saturday, because it basically fit what I was trying to say, is that you got to win ugly or not so pretty at times. And I thought that's what the defense did. And ultimately, they needed to make a stand at the end of the game. They did. And now you could argue that there should have been a pass interference on Van Hicks. He was basically not admitting it, but admitting it yesterday.
Yeah, I thought it was hilarious. Caesar Williams has been so defensive about it. It's like nobody knows. Jim Leonard said, well, he didn't say it wasn't. He said he appreciated that call. And Van Hicks said, hey, they didn't call it. Right. So yeah. I'm with you. I wrote this in my observations after the game, and I was pulling it up. I didn't mean to be rude looking at my phone here. But so in Jim Leonard's career as Wisconsin's defensive coordinator, his defenses have allowed 462 yards of offense against Nebraska in 3 matchups. Against all other opponents, this includes multiple games against Michigan, multiple games against Ohio State, all other games, 268.
Wow.
That makes no sense. And it's like as much crap as Scott Frost gets, for some reason, he's got something that works well against what Jim Leonard does.
Yeah, and what was really impressive was that he had done it coming off a bye week in which he fired 4 of his offensive assistants. I mean, I thought they'd try to throw some wrinkles on. I expected more chaos and the potential for confusion on Nebraska's part just because of everything they've been going through. But they were pretty sharp. You take away those 2 interceptions, and that offense was really, really good.
It was. I think the one thing that this is something schematic that the Badgers have been so successful with all year. But they've got to figure out something that, because Nebraska took advantage of it over and over, was some delay routes from the line of scrimmage, and that was with running backs and with tight ends, starting the play like they're blocking, and then coming out late in the play, and there was just a ton of space. And that's because what the Badgers do with their inside linebackers is they're reading those guys, and if they see, hey, they're blocking on this play, they blitz. And I saw a ton of people on Twitter during the game being reactionary and being upset, like, our inside linebackers are getting exposed and all this stuff. And it's like, well, no, they're blitzing. They're doing the things that have made them the best linebacker duo in the country all year long, and the team has finally figured out how to expose it. And like I said, Nebraska's offensive line played about as well as I think they have all year in preventing Martinez getting sacked, and he made moves. But I think they're going to have to do something about those delay routes, because that is something that you can incorporate into an offense a little bit better than all that eye candy that we've been talking about. It's a little bit easier to say, all right, tight end who's used to blocking, hey, do that for a couple of seconds, then go on a little flat route. There's a ton of space there. So I don't know what that looks like if you've got to make Chanel and Sanborn look a little bit longer, which, that's not good too, because then you're going to take them out of the pass rush. they're going to have to do something about those delay routes. I'm not sure what that is. That's why Jim Leonhard makes $1 million a year and I don't. So they got to figure out something there.
Yeah, and so, ultimately, if Wisconsin wins this game, you're talking about doing this for the Ohio State game, and you're right. The delaying a second or two on blitzing leaves Faion Hicks and Caesar Williams and all those guys exposed in the back end against really good receivers. So it's a pick your poison to some degree, and we'll get into analyzing that game if it comes to be. But it is like I'll go back to this. I'm more impressed with what Nebraska did than I am discouraged by Wisconsin defense, and I'm certainly not going to say a defense that has been really great all season was exposed or wasn't what we thought it was.
Yeah, no, I'm with you there. So let's jump into this Minnesota game because I think this is a prime example of why people love college football so much, because there is legitimate, hate's not the right word, but like there was more intensity from the guys talking on Monday than in a normal week. And a lot of them said, like, yeah, in practices are different. There's just a different feel throughout the whole week around here. Like, this means a lot, regardless of, the division. Like if Wisconsin wasn't in a position to win the division, this game means the same. And I think that's why, like, rivalries like this, Wisconsin-Minnesota, are why people love college football so much, because, Minnesota's had an okay season. They've had all these injuries, and they're thinking the same thing like Wisconsin is. Like, man, if we can win this game and get some help, we can win the division and, have this kind of miraculous season despite everything. But then they're also thinking, hey, if we don't get the help, we still beat Wisconsin. That's a big feather in our cap for this season. I think that overall, that's that feeling that fans have that they want to beat Minnesota so bad, and the fact that it's shared by the players, that's what makes college football as popular as it is, because there's that tribalism and there's that just whole energy of, like, whatever else happened, let's beat them.
Yeah, I was surprised, to some degree, in some of the guys. If it's one thing if you're a Wisconsin player who's grown up in Wisconsin, who's been around this rivalry forever, to feel that way. Like when Faion Hicks, who's from Florida, was talking about how, we don't like Minnesota, they don't like us. I'm like, wow, that really stood out to me as being like, yeah, this rivalry is huge to them. And when there's so much else to focus on this week, they are really locked in on, hey, we don't want to see Minnesota running across the field and grabbing that axe. That's ultimately what this comes down to.
It is. Let's jump into the offense, because I think this is a really intriguing matchup, because kind of under the radar, Minnesota's defense is pretty solid. And I think a big part of it is they just don't make the crucial mistakes. Like, you have to drive on them. Now, we'll talk about it in a second here, but I think I'm not saying that's a good thing for the Badger offense, but the Badger offense is more used to having to drive on teams than other teams are. Like, so many college football teams are based on explosive plays now, where it's like Wisconsin's used to driving it and knows how to succeed that way. But some of the stats for Minnesota, basically 19 points a game allowed, 103 rushing yards, and 106 passing yards per game. You look at that and you think that might be a top 10, 15 defense if that holds. I think I didn't do it specifically for the Big Ten games. They're a little bit worse than that. But I just think that for that defense, it's only got one guy that you're saying that's a for sure NFL player in Boye Mafe, their defensive end. It's a pretty impressive group that I don't know if it gets the recognition for it, just because, I don't know if Minnesota gets the recognition for much this year. Yeah,
and you wonder if they were kind of flip spots with Wisconsin, if they'd be getting more, if they'd be more on the radar. And certainly if Minnesota wins this game and ends up in the Big Ten title game, if Iowa loses, I think then that defense will get some credit. But I also wonder, too, and by poo-pooing Minnesota's defense, I'm to some degree poo-pooing Wisconsin's defense, but there's not a lot of great offenses in the Big Ten West, right? That's part of it. Minnesota played Ohio State, but it was the first game of the year before Ohio State was Ohio State, too.
And Ohio State scored 35 points that game.
They did, but I think if that game's played today, it's even 50, worse, right? So to some degree, you got to take stats with a grain of salt. But I don't want to take away from what I think you're hitting on is a really fundamentally sound defense. Not a defense with a lot of stars, but just a defense that stops the run and that really gets things done.
Yeah, and that's why I think this is such a big test for the Wisconsin's offensive line, because like I mentioned, Boye Mafe is a good defensive end. that's going to be a big test for guys like Tyler Beach. And, I mean, Logan Bruss continues playing really good football, but Tyler Beach especially, that's going to be if I know that they flip him around short side, wide side of the field, but if I'm Minnesota, I'm probably throwing Mafe on Beach as many plays as possible. I don't care about the alignments, especially on third down. We'll see if that happens on Saturday. But I think that this line, this offensive line's been so good at creating holes, and you look at what they did against Nebraska. Every year against Nebraska, for whatever reason, they just have they have that defense figured out to just create massive lanes, and Braylon Allen had this awesome game. But I think against Minnesota, their front seven is as committed to stopping the run as Wisconsin is. And they're not as successful, but I think that they're going to challenge Wisconsin's offense to take those 4 and 5 yard gains. Like I could be wrong. We'll see what happens on Saturday, but I don't think you're going to see those 50, 70, 25 yard gains that Braylon Allen was able to do against Nebraska so consistently against Minnesota. I think it's going to be a grinded out. Allen finishes around 150, but maybe it's a couple 2-3 touchdowns again, and the Wisconsin offense looks pretty good. I think that they're going to have both sides or both aspects of the offense working, because Minnesota is not going to let themselves get run over, play in, play out.
Are you predicting a big dig route game?
I am.
Yeah.
I am. I think these corners have been okay, and just knowing what Minnesota has done against Wisconsin over the years, they're going to say, we're taking away Jake Ferguson. However successful they can be with that, we'll see. But I think it is going to have to be a pretty balanced, 200 passing yards, 150 rushing yards type of game for Wisconsin to have success.
Don't you feel so much better about Wisconsin being able to do that now than you did maybe 6 weeks ago? Because the thing I worried about 6 weeks ago was, yeah, they're capable of grinding, but something inevitably is going to go wrong. A turnover, holding something, right? And they just are not going to be able to finish off drives. They've been doing such a better job lately of finishing off drives. And yeah, I mean, you talk about Braylon Allen and the chunk plays. That's been a game changer. That's completely changed the identity of this offense. But I do think they've just been so much more fundamentally sound and able to put together long drives without you worrying about something going wrong.
Yeah, and you mentioned the dig routes and some of the things that this passing game's doing. The number one thing that I think Minnesota's going to say is, let's try to make Graham Mertz, impatient in the sense of, we're just going to give him those shorter routes, and then when he does try to go deep, then we're going to hope he's throwing the double coverage or try to force things into guys because maybe it's third and medium, third and long. And I think Graham Mertz has done a better job in the last 5-6 weeks of not doing that and being smart with the ball. But that's where I think Minnesota tests these opposing quarterbacks the most. Is there's, as I mentioned before, very few college offenses right now are designed to grind out drives and be efficient in 10, 12 play scenarios. And that's something I think Graham Mertz has kind of, you used the word humbled earlier for the defense. I think this is where Graham Mertz has kind of humbled himself and saying, hey, I don't need to make super flashy downfield throws to be successful. You look at what they did with Jake Ferguson last week. He had one throw over the middle that was, I think 12 yards in the air, but pretty much everything else was 5-6 yards away from the line of scrimmage and let him run after the catch. That's what they need to do against Minnesota's defense, because I think that's where the holes are going to be, is underneath and then a little catch and run action.
I know Mertz's numbers weren't great last week, but I thought he played a really good game. I mean, first of all, if Pryor doesn't drop the one early, that changes the stats a lot. I thought the touchdown throw to Pryor might have been one of his better throws of the year.
I agree.
With pretty tight coverage there. Yeah, so I think it's another positive sign that Mertz has figured some stuff out and is playing better. And again, limiting the mistakes is such a huge reason this team is where it's at now compared to where it was at in early October.
Absolutely. If Graham Mertz has, let's say, an average Graham Mertz game where he has a turnover, they probably lose to Nebraska.
Sure.
I honestly think if they would have given up bad field position with a turnover or possibly a touchdown, you never know what the turnover is, but I mean, I think you lose that game just because that's what, as efficient as they were moving the ball and scoring. They scored 5 touchdowns, obviously. I think they only punted 3 times. I'd have to go back and check again. But as efficient as they were offensively, to not turn the ball over against a defense that had moderate success turning the ball over. That's a huge thing, and that's got to continue this week. And Minnesota hasn't had a ton of success creating takeaways, but you know that they're looking at Graham Mertz. I mean, and I think that's one of the things Braylon Allen talked about it earlier in the year. Like, his identity around the league was, hey, this guy will fumble if we attack the ball on him, and he's corrected that over the last few weeks. Graham Mertz's identity is still in this league that, hey, this guy will give us a chance if we're smart and fundamentally sound with what we do. And I think that's what Minnesota's going to go into this game thinking, like, let's make him make a mistake.
You have Danny Davis big game question mark on here. Is that
it's just this whole season
he's due, right?
He's due, exactly, because this whole season it's been, hey, that guy was forgotten last week, then he has a big game, and really the only guy that's been every weekend has a big or has a solid contribution has been Jake Ferguson. But I just feel like we keep talking about Chim DK getting more involved. I don't know if or why it's not going to happen, but I just don't have a great feeling that it's going to happen. So I feel like this is going to be Danny Davis's week after Pryor had that touchdown, and as you mentioned, should have had quite a more impressive stat line with that big drop.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. They're going to need the passing game to hold up its end of the bargain this week.
Yeah. All right, let's jump to the defense. I know we talked about them already here in this podcast, but I think this is an interesting matchup because Minnesota is as committed to the run game as anybody that Wisconsin has faced this year outside of Army, where that's their entire offense. Even Michigan, you go back and look at that Michigan game, Michigan just kind of let the run go. They came out in their same run sets, but they had Cade McNamara throwing all over the place. So I think this is going to be the first game of the year outside of Army where it's like, hey, this offense has to run on us because that's that's like the base of everything they do. And I thought Jim Leonhard was pretty enlightening in the fact that like they do things that make it hard to tackle them and make it hard to get penetration against their offensive line. And that's something that this defensive line and this front seven has been good at all year is getting penetration and just making the running back hesitate in the backfield. That's why you're seeing so many tackles for loss and so many gains of 0 and 1 yard, because once the running back gets the ball, there's no flow to it. He has to stop and read and then make a move, and guys on defense can recover on that.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota, I think, will just keep pounding away. I just don't think they're going to give up on their game plan. They have an identity. They're going to stick with it. They like to get downhill. Jim Leonhard talked about how they kind of have a good way of – they're really good at just getting on the edge of stuff and being able to get downhill from there. So I expect this to be a classic one in the trenches game, and I think Minnesota's really good, and their offensive line is good, and so that'd be the one thing that concerns me a little bit about this matchup.
Yeah, if Mo Ibrahim was still healthy, I mean, number one, I think Minnesota's probably in a win and in situation as well, and I think they're ranked because I don't think they lose some of the dumb games that they've lost this year. But I just think that would have changed so much of what I think about this game just because of the running back talent and how good he is at breaking tackles. They don't have that. They're still committed to the running game like we were talking about, but the guys they're handing off to just aren't quite as talented. The one thing that jumps out to me when you go through all of Minnesota's offensive stats, and they only have 10 turnovers this year going into game number 12. And for a team that's not, or like I mentioned, is on their fifth running back and a quarterback that's up or down depending on the week, but he's not giving the other team the ball, and that's a positive in itself. I wonder if this is a type of game where Wisconsin's going to have to win and dominate defensively without the aid of those turnovers, some of those earlier games in this run.
Yeah, I wonder too. I mean, it might become a punt fest, and it's probably, I kind of envision a game that's lower scoring and just a lot of punts because of that. Now, I do think one thing that, again, can change this is if Wisconsin gets an early lead and kind of forces Minnesota to do stuff it doesn't want to do. And if they kind of force them into passing situations, does that put Tanner Morgan in some uncomfortable positions, and can they take advantage of that? I mean, that'd be the one way. And again, getting pressure on him. This is not Adrian Martinez back there in terms of eluding pressure. So again, that's another area I think Wisconsin can attack in.
Yeah, and you go back and watch that Nebraska game. This was clearly a decision from Jim Leonhard to keep his outside linebackers as contained players, both on Martinez and in the run game. And that's why I think you saw some pretty quiet stat lines and kind of impact plays from guys like Nick Herbig and Noah Burks, because they were not floating, but their job was to make sure nothing got outside of them. And because of that, they did a really good job. I think just fundamentally wise, like everything had to go between the tackles that worked outside of some of those deeper pass plays. But I think that this is going to be a week where both those guys have to feast, because we've seen when Tanner Morgan's good, it's mostly off of RPOs and that play action stuff over the middle. So I think they're not going to be able to blitz guys like Chanel and Sanborn quite as much. I think you got to have them hang back a little bit and get in the way of those, and at least make Morgan think about his throw on those. Because we've seen Jack Sanborn make picks off of plays like that. You go back and look at the bowl game last year. He's got the quick hands and the ability to jump those routes. But if he's blitzing, he's just physically not there. So I think this is a big game for this outside linebacker core to get after the quarterback, get back to what they've been doing all year, maybe without the aid of the inside linebacker blitz quite as much, just because they've got to take away one of the bread and butter type of things in that RPO game. And
do you think there's going to be pent-up energy after the way they were asked to play last week?
Yeah, I mean, knowing how Nick Herbig plays and knowing how Noah Burks has played this year, I can't imagine having to basically sit on the line of scrimmage, eat blocks, and keep your outside shoulder free for 90 plays or however Nebraska ran was all that fun. So I feel like they're going to be, pinning their ears back and ready to go.
Also, and we kind of say this every week too, but the front three, anything you can get pressure-wise and disruption-wise from Benton and Henningsen, I think would be important this week too, for the reasons you just mentioned.
Yeah, because you go back and look at the 2019 game. I throw out last year because Minnesota was just coming off of COVID. Mo Ibrahim was such a load. They were just a little bit of a different team. But if you look at 2019, guys like Isaiah Loudermilk and Garrett Rand had, I think, their best games of that season, dominating up front and not only eating up double teams, but getting off of them and creating that penetration. So I'm with you. This defensive line, I'm not sure if Rodis Johnson's going to be able to play one of their backup DNs, but guys like Isaiah Mullins, Henningsen, Benton, they have to have solid games and make some contributions in the sense of getting off blocks and making tackles, because one of the things that this interior for Minnesota's offensive line does pretty well is get up to the second level. Now, Chanel and Sanborn all year have done a good job, avoiding blocks from offensive linemen and making plays regardless. But I think on the defensive line level, they're saying, hey, we can get by with not double-teaming Benton or not double-teaming Henningsen, and they've got to make them pay for that.
Yeah, I keep waiting for Benton to have a really monster game, and maybe this is the one where he does. I think he's been good. I don't want to, I just feel like I've been pumping the kid up all year, really since training camp, and we haven't seen that huge explosive game. Maybe this is when it comes. Yeah. Can I go off topic for a little bit?
Absolutely.
Did you catch Monday when Jim Leonard, when I asked him the question about the Big Ten West being deeper than it's ever been this year, he talked about how next year, basically hinted at the fact that they might not be very good defensively next year. And that got me to thinking, they are going to lose a ton of guys. I mean, this is really the last run for a lot of these guys defensively. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of seniors, a couple juniors who might decide to leave early. It's going to be a little bit of a rebuilding project after this season.
Yeah. Unsolicited reporter opinion, but Keanu Benton should stay because you mentioned not putting up the monster games. I think there's just another element to his game that he's got to develop as a pass rusher to then be completely NFL ready, but who knows. And then another unsolicited reporter opinion, I think Leo Chanel should stay too because I don't think he's playing his real position or his NFL position right now. Pass coverage-wise, it's a major weakness. I don't know how well that would translate to the NFL. Now, if you want to say he would play inside linebacker on a 3-4 team that then would take him off the field on passing downs, maybe. Or maybe he plays outside linebacker. Whatever ends up being, I think he should stay to figure that out and be able to show some of those things. But even if they do, like you said, they're losing a ton of guys. They're losing Sanborn. They're losing the entire secondary from at least what we can tell. I don't think any of these guys are going to be taking their COVID year. Wilder
Hicks
already is.
Hicks
said
hinted
he might,
at it, yeah.
So I think – I wonder just if Leonard said the whole, we want some other teams to take a dip because, that's just him. And he said kind of the same thing. But I do agree with you. He knows that there's going to be such a massive turnover on this defense that it's going to be quite a different look next season.
Right.
All right. Jim, let's jump into our picks here. I forgot to write it down on the sheet, but we both went 4-3 last week, so I think that means I'm up 8 on 500 on the year, and then you were down 3, excuse me.
Just happy to have a winning week.
Yeah, that's a good feeling going into the last week of the regular season here. And I actually wrote down a little bit of the stakes that are in on each of these games going into them. So we'll start with the first one here. Iowa is a 1.5-point favorite going to Nebraska on Black Friday. I kind of like this out-of-nowhere tradition that these teams have started playing this game on Friday because not a lot of good games on that Friday after Thanksgiving. Everybody wants football, so I like having that Big Ten game there, and these two teams play entertaining games. Not always, the prettiest games, but they're always close. This line actually swung 4.5 points since Adrian Martinez has been announced out, and we saw Smothers, their Nebraska backup, come in for that one series. I mean, he ran the ball once, and then they went into halftime. It's kind of strange that they used him like that and burned his red shirt, as we saw, but we'll see. I mean, he would have burned it anyway now that he's going to play. All that being said, I don't like Iowa. Everybody knows that I've been down on Iowa pretty much all year because I don't like their offense. But as we saw, Adrian Martinez is Nebraska's offense. They have good players, but he has to be the one that gets them the ball. I know there's a lot of optimism in Nebraska about some others. I just don't think you can throw him out there against this Iowa defense for his first career start and expect much. So at 1.5 points, I'll take Iowa on the road.
Yeah, I am too. I'm really disappointed because I agree with you. That's a game that I wanted to watch on Friday, in part because I thought Nebraska could win that game with if Martinez was healthy. He's not. I think that completely changes the dynamic. I also wonder too whether this this Nebraska team can win a close game. I have no faith that this program knows how to win. I think the talent is there to a large degree. I just think somehow Scott Frost and this program need to figure out how to win because I think the one thing that's lacking right now is just a winning culture. They just cannot get over the top.
Yeah, it's a real thing, and we always hear about culture and we always hear about this stuff, and this is the manifestation of it. Like a team that's this close week in, week out, there's just a little bit something missing, and maybe the new guys that they bring in next year will be able to bring that. But one other quick note on this game, Iowa can also still win the Big Ten West.
Right.
If they win, Wisconsin wins, or excuse me, Wisconsin loses to Minnesota, and then they would need Purdue to lose to Indiana, I believe. Yeah. They would need Purdue to lose to Indiana because they can't go in a tie with Purdue because they would lose that. So they need some help on Saturday. But Iowa can still win the Big Ten West here. So I think that they're going to be able to cover at least 1.5. I don't know. I was about to say I think they'll be able to roll, but Iowa can't roll anybody with their offense.
No, I'm expecting a really low-scoring, ugly game.
Yeah, and if you saw just the final score last week for Iowa-Illinois, because why would you watch that game? Part of their scoring was a kickoff return for a touchdown and then a defensive turnover that gave them the ball at the 20. So, moving on from Iowa. Ohio State is going to Michigan. The East title is on the line here at 11 o'clock on Saturday. Ohio State with that absurd blowout of Michigan State. I mean, that was over in the first quarter, and then they decided to play 3 more, and it didn't get any better. So Ohio State is a 8-point favorite here at Michigan. I'm taking Ohio State. They just look so good right now. Their offense is so rolling. I think Michigan's defense is going to be able to slow them down at times, and I think they're not going to be able to run all that well. But the way Stroud and these receivers are playing, 8 points isn't enough for me to scare me off.
I agree. I really wanted to pick Michigan. I really wanted to believe that Michigan even had a chance to win this outright. I just think Ohio State is so much in Michigan's head.
Yes.
That's part of it, too. Like, not only are they more talented, but I just think they're in Jim Harbaugh's head and that program's head, and I think they're going to win by a couple touchdowns.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier in the show, but if Michigan wins and they win the East title, I think that's a rematch that Wisconsin would welcome.
Yeah.
Because you got to remember, it was 13-10 at halftime, Michigan, but Michigan was up 13. Wisconsin scored the last 10, or it was 10-0. Then it was 10-3, 13-3. Wisconsin scores a touchdown right before halftime. There was some momentum. Graham Mertz was playing really well. Then he gets hurt first drive of the third quarter. It was kind of over. So I think that would be a matchup that Wisconsin would welcome. So next game here, Maryland is a 1.5-point favorite at Rutgers. Bowl eligibility is on the line for both of these teams. Both of them sitting at 5-6 right now. I think Maryland hasn't won a game in a month and a half. right? I think they've lost 5 or 6 games in a row. I'm not entirely sure why they're favored. I'm going to take Rutgers. I just think they're a tougher team, and I think Schiano will be able to pull some motivational stuff. And like I said, this is 2 bad teams. I don't know who's going to be watching this game outside of diehard fans of these teams, but I think I'll take Rutgers in the points there.
Yeah, I'm taking Rutgers too. I just think that Schiano will have a way of kind of making this game ugly, and they'll grind it out. And I wonder how much life is left in Maryland after having the fast start this season and then just completely falling apart.
I don't know why for a team that we watched get hammered by Wisconsin that we both continually pick Rutgers, but
because then they went and won at Illinois the next week. I mean, I'm probably relying too much on that game in my mind, but you're right because it's not. We saw with our own eyes that is not a good team at all.
Yeah, but I don't think Maryland's
we just haven't seen with Maryland with our own eyes. But yeah.
All right, Penn State is going to Michigan State, and I don't understand this line at all, Jim. I need you to help me out here. This is a pick'em. This is an even line, so that means that Vegas thinks Penn State is objectively better because it's at Michigan State. I don't think anybody too major on Michigan State got hurt last week. I'm honestly checking with you. Did I miss something?
No. I was surprised. I was surprised with this line too. The one thing I do wonder is if there's a hangover effect from just going into Ohio State with your dreams of still winning the division and whatever else would come next.
Yeah, playoff.
Playoff, yep. And then just to have it completely slapped in the face so quickly and so explosively, I wonder if there's going to be some sort of hangover effect. Now, that's not going to stop me from picking Michigan. I'm going to take Michigan State, but that line does surprise me.
Yeah, and I don't know if they're thinking, well, if Ohio State just did that passing-wise. I mean, Michigan State's passing defense is atrocious. Like, that's been Achilles' heel for them all year, and obviously Ohio State destroyed that. Maybe they're thinking Penn State, Sean Clifford, Jahan Dotson, Parker Washington, these guys could do that too. Maybe. I don't get that line because that's Vegas saying that it's at least 3 or 4 points better at neutral field. So, and I just don't trust Michigan or Penn State to play that consistently. A little bit of stakes here, though. Michigan State, if they win, that's a lock-up New Year's Six Bowl.
Right.
Absolutely. Right. I mean, 11-1, and it's a conference loss. It wasn't like a terrible loss for the Spartans. So,
which is why I think Mel Tucker can get this team motivated again.
That and $100 million in the bank, allegedly,
how about that,
or possibly. Yeah, I saw. I mean, that was right before the Badger game started. I saw a bunch of people on Twitter saying like, "Hope Mel Tucker signed that contract and nobody knows about it yet because that might have to get amended after that." But we're both on the Spartans there. Northwestern is going to Illinois. Illinois has super fringe bowl potential because if they win this game, that would be 5 wins. And then they have an outstanding graduation rate on their team. Actually, pretty much like a quarter of the team has already graduated, and that's what matters when you're talking about those very, very last bowl spots. Because of that, and because I think that Northwestern is very, very bad, I will take Illinois laying 6.5. I don't love that point total, and it's probably too much, but I think Bielema will be able to do enough. I think defensively, just because I know Northwestern doesn't have very much offensively. I think defensively Illinois will be able to slow them down and win by a touchdown.
I agree, although I'm very reluctant because it seems like when we expect things from Illinois, like the Rutgers game, it doesn't happen. When we don't expect it, they pull something out of nothing. So I'm taking Illinois, but I'm not real confident about that.
I think that's fair. I think selling these seniors, I mean, we got talked about all throughout the summer and the preseason. What was it, 25 seniors and super seniors on Illinois' roster? You know, trying to sell them on the idea, hey, like, earn one more game potentially. Because, you know, I saw the number, it'll change after this weekend, but I saw a number yesterday. There's still like 18, or there's going to be 8 at least bowl spots that won't have a 6th win team. I think it's going to drop this weekend, but Illinois has a very good chance if they get to that 5th win. I think they'll be able to fire up enough to do that, especially at home too. Right. Not that they're it's a tough place to play, but it's Northwestern. It's not like they're used to big crowds either. Right. So, all right, Indiana is going to Purdue. Purdue is a 15-point favorite. Purdue has a very fringe shot at still winning the Big Ten West here, and because of that, and because of how terrible Indiana looks right now, and they kind of just seem like they quit on the season. I will lay the 15 with Purdue. I think there's a rivalry there, and you never know with some of those games, but I think that this is one of the few times that Purdue is at a much better place talent-wise and just feel-wise than Indiana. I think they get it done there.
I agree. I am shocked that Indiana's going to go, if this happens, going to go through the season winless in the Big Ten. I mean, I just never would have predicted that. I really thought this was a top 15, top 20 team.
Yeah, I thought they turned the corner as well. I thought they had what they wanted. Maybe they lost their defensive coordinator from last season.
Yeah.
I might have, just mentally not registered how big that was. But yeah, that's in all of college football, that might be one of the biggest surprises.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. And then we've got the Wisconsin game to wrap us up here. Wisconsin is a 7-point favorite at Minnesota. 7 is a tough number. Because I think they win this game by 7 to 10 range. And that's more respect to Minnesota playing this rivalry well. And, I say all that, but then I think about the last 2 times Wisconsin's played at Minnesota, and it's been blowouts. So I'm a little leery about this pick. I'm going to take Wisconsin, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is like a 21-10, kind of ugly all day, but Wisconsin's in control type of game.
I'm going to take Minnesota. Again, I think it's right on the edge. I think that's a great line. I'm thinking maybe more in the 4 to 6 range, like a 17-13-ish type game, or 20 to 14, something like that. I just think it's going to be close throughout. I think it's going to be ugly at times. I think it's going to be, like I said before, I think there's going to be a lot of punts. I think Wisconsin wins this game, but I don't think it's going to be a runaway.
All right. Make sure you guys stay with us on madison.com all week for all of our Minnesota-Wisconsin coverage. Lots of interesting stuff coming this week because we had to have so much in for the Thanksgiving holiday. So a little bit different type of featurey stuff, but we'll have still, obviously, our game preview and everything that you need for Wisconsin, Minnesota. A couple of things that I want you guys to make sure you check out. It's on madison.com right now, a story about Braylon Allen and his NIL dealings and how he's probably going to be one of the biggest NIL stars going into next season. He's already got kind of a base going with Iron Jock Clothing, Wisconsin-based company. So you can read about how that deal came together and how a 17-year-old is not only navigating being a featured player on a Power 5 offense, but then also this business world that his mom has to sign all of his contracts and everything for him, which is kind of a funny deal there. So make sure you check that out as well. And then I'm still debating, Jim, if this podcast will go up Wednesday or Thursday, because I kind of feel like if I put it up Thursday on Thanksgiving, it's not going to get listened to. So I might go with Wednesday so people have something to listen to in the drive or something. So if it is up Wednesday, make sure you check out madison.com for a Jim Leonard story coming up sometime in the middle of the week about his film study and how the Badgers are winning games, before they really step on the field there. So lots of good stuff on madison.com. I know Jim's got interesting stuff coming as well, Open Gym and
Thanksgiving Day column, and then a column later in the week just kind of how if they do end up winning this division, it's really probably one of the more impressive division titles based on a lot of factors. A, because of where they were, and because I really don't think the Big Ten West, which gets a bad rap, is all that bad.
All right, great stuff there. Make sure you're at madison.com. 5 months for $5 is the deal right now. That might be changing soon. Might even want to stay on madison.com and check all that out. But make sure you're subscribed. Get you through football and a bowl game, basketball, hockey, all this great stuff coming up. Volleyball, I should have mentioned that as well.
Yeah.
And then everything else that we do news coverage-wise here at madison.com. Lots of great stuff there. So, Jim, have a great Thanksgiving.
You too.
I will see you up in Minnesota. Thank you guys very much for listening. We'll be back next week.